Rain poured down hard on the city streets as Richard Moore drove his shiny black car through downtown. Richard was a rich man who had made millions by starting a tech company that made phone apps. At 40 years old, he lived alone in a big house, spent most of his time working, and didn't have many real friends. Most people around him only cared about his money. That night, Richard had just left a boring business dinner. He felt empty inside despite his success. As he drove, his thoughts were far away, thinking about all the things money couldn't buy him. Real happiness, love, and purpose. The windshield wipers moved back and forth quickly as the rain got worse. Richard almost missed seeing her, a woman sitting under a small shop roof, trying to stay dry. She wasn't begging or asking for help. Instead, she was reading a book, using the dim light from the shop window. Something about her made Richard slow down his car. She wore old, dirty clothes, and her hair was tied back in a messy way. But there was something different about how she sat there, calm and focused on her book, even though she had nowhere to go. Richard felt a strange pull to stop. He never did things like this. His assistant usually handled any charity work with his money. But tonight was different. He parked his car and grabbed his umbrella. "Excuse me," he said, walking up to her. The woman looked up, surprised to see a man in an expensive suit standing there. "It's getting really cold and wet. Can I help you find shelter for tonight?" The woman looked at him with careful, smart eyes. "Thank you, but I'm fine," she said in a clear voice that surprised Richard. She didn't sound like someone who lived on the streets. "Please," Richard said. "There's a big storm coming. I can pay for a hotel room for you, no strings attached. You don't have to talk to me or even see me again." She studied his face for a long moment. "Why would you help a stranger?" Richard thought about it. "I don't know. Maybe because no one has ever looked at me like I'm just a regular person in a long time." Rain started to blow sideways, soaking them both despite the umbrella. The woman hugged her book to her chest to keep it dry. "I'm Sarah," she finally said, though Richard noticed she hesitated slightly before saying the name. "Richard," he replied, not giving his last name, which everyone in the business world would recognize. Sarah finally nodded and stood up. "Just for tonight, because of the storm." Richard took her to a nice hotel nearby. The desk clerk looked at Sarah's dirty clothes with judgment, but Richard's credit card quickly changed the clerk's attitude. He got Sarah her own room and gave her his business card. "If you need anything, call this number," he said. "Food, clothes, whatever you need." Sarah took the card and looked at it for a long time. "More technologies," she read. "Your asterisk that asterisk Richard Moore." Richard nodded, waiting for her face to change like everyone's did when they realized how rich he was. But Sarah just handed the card back to him. "I don't think I'll need this, but thank you for the room tonight." As Richard drove home, he couldn't stop thinking about Sarah. There was something mysterious about her. The way she spoke, how she carried herself, the book she was reading. None of it fit with someone living on the streets. For the first time in years, Richard felt truly curious about another person. Something told him their paths would cross again, and soon. What he didn't know was how meeting Sarah would change his life forever. A week passed, and Richard couldn't get Sarah out of his mind. He drove by the same spot several times, but she was never there. He wondered if she was okay, or if she had moved to another part of the city. One rainy morning, Richard was at his favorite coffee shop when he looked up and saw her. Sarah was at a small table in the corner, writing in a notebook. She wore the same old coat, but her hair was clean, and she looked less tired than before. Richard bought an extra coffee and walked over to her table. "May I join you?" he asked. Sarah looked up, surprised. "Mr. Moore," she said, "I didn't expect to see you again. Please, call me Richard." He put the coffee in front of her. "I got you this." She thanked him and took a small sip. Richard noticed her hands were clean but rough, with small cuts that showed she worked hard. "How have you been?" Richard asked. "I found some work cleaning at a restaurant," Sarah said. "They let me sleep in the back room." Richard nodded, noticing how she spoke, clear and proper, not like someone with little education. She closed her notebook quickly when she saw him looking at it. "What are you writing?" he asked. "Just thoughts," she said. "I like to write things down." They talked for an hour. Sarah knew a lot about books, news, and even business. She asked smart questions about his company, not just about how much money he made. When Richard asked about her past, she changed the subject. As they were talking, a business friend of Richard's came into the coffee shop. "Richard, good to see you," the man said, looking at Sarah with a frown. He clearly wondered why Richard was sitting with someone who looked poor. "James, this is my friend Sarah," Richard said. James gave a quick nod to Sarah, but then turned to Richard. "We still on for the charity dinner tomorrow?" "Yes, I'll be there," Richard said, feeling annoyed at how James ignored Sarah. After James left, Sarah stood up. "I should go. My shift starts soon." "Wait," Richard said. "I have an idea. My assistant quit last week, and I need someone new. Would you be interested in the job?" Sarah looked shocked. "Me? But I have no experience." "You're smart and seem organized," Richard said, pointing at her neat notebook. "I can teach you what you need to know." Sarah shook her head. "Your business friends like James would never accept someone like me working for you." "I don't care what they think," Richard said. "The job comes with a good salary and an apartment to live in. At least think about it." Sarah was quiet for a long time. "Why are you doing this? You don't know anything about me." "I'm a good judge of people," Richard said. "And something tells me you have an interesting story." Sarah smiled a little. "Everyone has a story, Richard." She took a pen and wrote a number on a napkin. "This is the restaurant where I work. Call me tomorrow, and I'll give you my answer." As Sarah left, Richard felt excited for the first time in years. There was something special about this woman, and he wanted to learn more about her. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Sarah and wondering about her past. Why was someone so smart and well-spoken living on the streets? What was she hiding? And why did he care so much about a woman he barely knew? Little did Richard know that hiring Sarah would be a decision that would change both their lives forever. 2 months passed, and Sarah proved to be an amazing assistant. She organized Richard's messy schedule, fixed problems before they got big, and even helped him think of new ideas for his business. Richard's office had never run so smoothly. Sarah now lived in the small apartment above Richard's office. She kept it very clean but had few personal things. She wore the simple work clothes Richard had bought for her, but nothing fancy. She saved most of her money, which made Richard even more curious about her. One day, Richard had an important meeting with some people who wanted to invest in his company. Just before the meeting, his computer stopped working, and all his presentation files were lost. "Don't worry," Sarah said calmly. She pulled out her notebook where she had written all the important numbers and facts. She quickly made a new presentation while Richard called the tech team. During the meeting, one of the investors asked a hard question about the company's money. Before Richard could answer, Sarah spoke up. "If I may," she said, showing a chart she had made. "This explains how the company has grown in the past year." The investors were impressed. After they left, Richard looked at Sarah with new eyes. "Where did you learn to understand business like that?" Sarah looked away. "I read a lot." That night, Richard invited Sarah to have dinner with him to thank her for saving the meeting. They went to a fancy restaurant, and even though Sarah was wearing simple clothes, she knew which fork to use for each part of the meal. "You weren't always homeless, were you?" Richard asked quietly. Sarah put down her fork. "No," she said after a long pause. "I had a different life before." "Will you tell me about it?" Richard asked. "Not yet," Sarah said. "Maybe someday." As they were leaving the restaurant, they ran into Richard's mother, Mrs. Moore. She was with her friends from the charity group. "Richard, what a surprise," Mrs. Moore said, looking at Sarah with cold eyes. She pulled Richard aside. "Who is this girl? Please tell me she's not another gold digger after your money." "Mother, this is Sarah, my assistant," Richard said firmly. "And she just helped me close a very important business deal." Mrs. Moore didn't look convinced. She invited Richard to her charity event the next week. "Bring your assistant, if you must," she said with a fake smile. On the drive home, Sarah was quiet. "Your mother doesn't like me," she finally said. "My mother doesn't like anyone she thinks isn't from a good family," Richard explained. "She cares too much about money and status." "And you don't?" Sarah asked. Richard thought about it. "I used to. But lately, I've been thinking there's more to life than just being rich." When they reached Sarah's apartment, Richard walked her to the door. "You don't have to come to my mother's charity event," he said. "Actually, I think I should," Sarah said with a small smile. "It might be interesting." That night, Richard couldn't sleep again. He found himself thinking about Sarah more and more. Not just about her mystery, but about her smile, her smart mind, and how she saw the world differently than anyone he knew. What Richard didn't know was that Sarah was also awake, looking at an old photo she kept hidden in her notebook. In the photo, she looked very different, wearing expensive clothes and standing in front of a huge mansion. She touched the photo gently, then put it away and wiped a tear from her eye. The night of Mrs. Moore's charity event arrived. Richard waited outside Sarah's apartment, wondering what she would wear. When she opened the door, he was surprised. Sarah had found a simple but nice black dress. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and she wore small pearl earrings he had never seen before. "You look beautiful," Richard said. "Thank you," Sarah replied. "I've been saving these earrings. They're the only nice thing I kept from before." The charity event was at a big hotel. The room was full of rich people wearing fancy clothes and jewelry. When Richard and Sarah walked in, people turned to look at them. Richard was used to this, but Sarah seemed nervous for the first time since he met her. Mrs. Moore greeted them with a tight smile. "Richard, darling. And Sarah, was it? How nice of you to come." As they moved through the crowd, Richard noticed how people whispered when they passed. He heard bits like "his assistant," and "where did he find her?" It made him angry, but Sarah seemed calm. "Don't worry about me," she told him. "I've dealt with worse than rich people gossip." During dinner, they sat at a table with some of Richard's business friends. One man, Peter Wilson, kept asking Sarah questions about her past. "So, where did you go to school?" Peter asked. "I studied on my own mostly," Sarah answered. "And your family? What do they do?" Peter continued. Sarah took a sip of water. "I don't have family anymore." Richard tried to change the subject, but Peter wouldn't stop. "It's just unusual for someone with no experience to become an assistant to one of the richest men in the city." Before Sarah could answer, a woman at the next table dropped her glass. It shattered, and wine spilled everywhere. The woman cried out in surprise. Sarah quickly went to help, picking up glass pieces and using napkins to clean the spill. As she bent down, her necklace fell out from inside her dress. It was a small gold locket. An older woman across the table stared at the locket. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice shaking. "That locket. May I see it?" Sarah tucked it back inside her dress. "It's nothing special," she said. "It looks exactly like the lockets from the Westbrook family collection," the woman insisted. "I'm Caroline Westbrook's best friend. Her daughter had one just like it." The room got quiet. People were watching. Sarah's face went pale. "You must be mistaken," Sarah said, her voice suddenly different, more proper, like someone from a rich family. Mrs. Moore stepped forward. "Who are you really?" she demanded. Richard put his arm around Sarah. "That's enough. We're leaving." In the car, Sarah was silent, holding the locket tightly. "You don't have to tell me anything," Richard said. "But I want you to know that whatever your secret is, it won't change how I feel about you." Sarah looked at him with tears in her eyes. "How do you feel about me?" Richard realized he had never said it out loud. "I think I'm falling in love with you." Sarah closed her eyes. "You don't even know who I really am." "Then tell me," Richard said gently. Sarah took a deep breath. "My name isn't Sarah. It's Elizabeth Westbrook." Richard froze. The Westbrook family was one of the richest in the country. They owned banks and buildings all over the world. "But the Westbrooks," Richard started, "lost everything 3 years ago," Sarah finished. "Or at least, that's what everyone thinks." Richard drove to a quiet park instead of going home. They sat on a bench under the stars, and Sarah, now revealed as Elizabeth, began to tell her story. "My father, William Westbrook, built one of the biggest banks in the country," she said. "We had more money than we could ever spend. I grew up in a mansion with servants and went to the best schools." Richard listened without saying anything. He could now see the proper way she spoke, the way she carried herself, all signs of her wealthy upbringing that he had noticed but couldn't explain before. "3 years ago, my father died suddenly," Elizabeth continued. "Everyone thought it was a heart attack. I was supposed to take over the family business." She twisted the locket in her hands. "But then I found his private papers." Her voice got shaky. "My father had been stealing money from thousands of people for years. He took their life savings and used it to make himself rich. When I added it all up, he had stolen over $500 million. Richard was shocked. The Westbrook Bank had been famous for its honest business practices. "Did you tell anyone?" Elizabeth shook her head. "I was going to. But then I found out that my uncle and 2 of our top managers were part of it too. They came to me and said we should keep everything quiet. They wanted me to keep running the business the same way." She stood up and walked a few steps, then turned to face Richard. "I couldn't do it, but I also couldn't turn in my own father and family. So I made a plan. I took all my personal money, about $50 million, and secretly gave it back to some of the people who lost the most." "And then you disappeared," Richard said, understanding now. Elizabeth nodded. "I couldn't live that life anymore, knowing it was built on other people's pain. I left a note saying I was going away, took nothing but this locket with my mother's picture, and just walked away." Richard tried to make sense of it all. "But why live on the streets? With your education, you could have found a normal job somewhere else where no one knew you." "I needed to understand how the real world works," Elizabeth said. "The people my father hurt, I wanted to know what their lives were like. And honestly, I felt I deserved to suffer a little for what my family did." Richard reached for her hand. "You didn't do anything wrong. You tried to make it right." "Not enough," she said sadly. "There are still thousands of people who lost everything. My uncle is running the bank now, and I heard he's doing the same terrible things." They sat in silence for a while. Finally, Richard spoke. "What will you do now? Everyone at the party recognized you. By tomorrow, the news will be everywhere. Missing Westbrook Harris found." Elizabeth looked tired. "I don't know. I can't go back to that world. But I can't hide anymore either." Richard squeezed her hand. "You don't have to decide tonight. You can stay at my guest house where no one will bother you." As they drove to Richard's home, Elizabeth looked out the window at the city lights. "I never meant to lie to you, Richard. I just wanted to be someone else for a while." "You didn't lie about who you are," Richard said. "Just your name and past. The person I fell in love with. That's still you." What neither of them knew was that someone from the party had already called the press. By morning, Elizabeth's face would be on every news channel in the country. And her uncle, who thought she was gone forever, would soon discover she was back. Richard woke up early the next morning to his phone ringing nonstop. News about Elizabeth was everywhere. "Westbrook Harris found living as homeless woman," read one headline. "Missing billionaire's daughter working as assistant to tech millionaire," read another. He rushed to the guest house to check on Elizabeth. She was sitting calmly at the table with a cup of tea, watching the news on a small TV. "Are you okay?" Richard asked. I knew this would happen someday, Elizabeth said. I just didn't think it would be so soon. The doorbell rang. Richard looked out the window and saw at least 20 reporters outside his gate. We don't have to talk to them, he said. Elizabeth shook her head. No, I need to face this. She stood up straighter, and Richard could see the change in her. She didn't look like Sarah the assistant anymore. She looked like someone born to handle difficult situations. Before they could make a plan, Richard's phone rang. It was his lawyer. Richard, you need to know something, the lawyer said. Harold Westbrook, Elizabeth's uncle, is giving a press conference right now. He's saying Elizabeth had a mental breakdown after her father died. He's trying to get legal control over her. Richard turned up the TV volume. Harold Westbrook was on screen, looking sad and concerned. My niece has been unwell since my brother's death, Harold was saying. She gave away large sums of money and then disappeared. We've been worried sick about her. Now that she's been found, we want to make sure she gets the medical help she needs. Elizabeth's face turned white with anger. He's lying. He wants to lock me up so I can't tell anyone what they did. The phone rang again. This time it was Mrs. Moore, Richard's mother. Richard, do you know what you've gotten yourself into? She asked. The Westbrooks are more powerful than anyone in this city. If what that girl says about them is true, you could be in danger. For once, Richard agreed with his mother. I know, Mother, but I'm not leaving Elizabeth to face this alone. After hanging up, Richard made a decision. We need help, he told Elizabeth. Someone who can protect you legally and help get the truth out. Who? Elizabeth asked. My friend Jack Chen, Richard said. He's a lawyer who fights for people who have been cheated by big companies, and he's not afraid of anyone. While Richard called Jack, Elizabeth watched more news. There was a story about people who had lost money when Westbrook Bank collapsed. An old man was crying as he talked about losing his retirement savings. A young couple had lost the money they saved for their child's medical treatment. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. This is all because of my family, she said. Richard put his arm around her. No, it's because of what your father and uncle did. Not you. Jack arrived an hour later, slipping past the reporters by coming through a back entrance. He listened to Elizabeth's story carefully, taking notes. This won't be easy, Jack said when she finished. Your uncle has a lot of power and friends in high places. But we have something he doesn't, Richard said. What's that? Elizabeth asked. The truth, Richard answered. And I have an idea how to use it. That night, Elizabeth couldn't sleep. She stood by the window watching the reporters who were still waiting outside. Why are you doing all this for me? She asked Richard. Your life was perfect before I came along. Richard smiled. No, it wasn't. I had everything money could buy, but nothing that really mattered. He took her hand. Besides, I have a feeling this isn't just your fight anymore. It's ours. Neither of them noticed the black car parked down the street, or the man inside taking pictures of them through the window. The next morning, Richard and Elizabeth met with Jack to discuss their plan. Jack had brought files filled with papers. I stayed up all night looking into Westbrook Bank, Jack explained. There are hundreds of people who lost everything. Some even took their own lives after the bank collapse. Elizabeth covered her face with her hands. This is even worse than I thought. But we found something interesting, Jack continued, showing them a paper. Your father kept a second set of books, the real records of where all the money went. How did you find that? Elizabeth asked. A former bank worker came forward after seeing you on the news. He wants to help, Jack said. The problem is, we don't have the actual books. But he says they exist. Richard leaned forward. Where would they be? In the main Westbrook house, in your father's private office, Jack told Elizabeth. Probably in his safe. Elizabeth nodded slowly. I know the safe. I know the code too. My father showed me before he died. But we can't just walk in there, Richard said. Harold would never let Elizabeth near that house. They sat quietly, thinking. Then Elizabeth had an idea. The annual Westbrook Charity Ball is tomorrow night. It's at the main house. Harold will still hold it to show everything is normal, she said. I could go. That's too dangerous, Richard argued. It's the only way, Elizabeth insisted. Everyone will be busy with the party. I can slip into my father's office, open the safe, and get the books. After much discussion, they agreed it was their best chance. Jack would create a distraction at the party. Richard would go as Elizabeth's date to protect her. That evening, a surprise visitor came to Richard's house. It was Mrs. Moore. Mother, this isn't a good time, Richard started. I'm not here to argue, Mrs. Moore said. Looking at Elizabeth, she added, I knew your mother years ago. She was a kind woman. Nothing like your father. Elizabeth was surprised. You knew my mother? Mrs. Moore nodded. When I heard what you did, giving away your money to help people your father hurt, I knew you were like her. She handed Elizabeth a small box. I have connections with the press. Tomorrow, I'll tell them your side of the story. After Mrs. Moore left, Elizabeth opened the box. Inside was a beautiful dress. For the ball, the note read. The next evening, Elizabeth looked stunning in the dress as they drove to the Westbrook mansion. Her hands shook as they approached the huge house where she grew up. We can still turn back, Richard said. No, we need to do this, Elizabeth replied. For all the people who lost everything. The mansion was filled with rich and powerful people. Music played as guests danced and talked. When Elizabeth walked in with Richard, the room went quiet. Harold Westbrook's face turned white, then red with anger. He quickly walked over. You have some nerve showing up here, he whispered angrily. It's still my house too, Elizabeth said calmly. Jack started his distraction, loudly asking Harold questions about the bank collapse. While everyone watched, Elizabeth and Richard slipped away to find her father's office. The office was just as Elizabeth remembered. She went to the painting on the wall and moved it aside, revealing a safe. Are you sure you remember the code? Richard asked nervously. Elizabeth nodded and began turning the dial. My father's birthday, my mother's birthday, and the day the bank was founded. The safe clicked open. Inside were several thick books and a file labeled Proof. Just as Elizabeth grabbed the books, the door opened. A security guard stood there with Harold right behind him. Well, Harold said with a cold smile. Stealing from your own family now, Elizabeth. The only thief here is you, Elizabeth replied, holding the books tightly. Harold turned to the guard. Call the police. Tell them we caught a trespasser. Harold stepped into the office, smiling like he had won. 2 more security guards appeared behind him. Give me those books, Elizabeth, Harold demanded, holding out his hand. Richard moved in front of Elizabeth. We're not giving you anything. Then you'll both go to jail, Harold said. Breaking into my house, stealing private papers. I wonder what your company's board will think of their CEO being arrested. Elizabeth clutched the books tightly. This house is still half mine, and these books prove what you and my father did. Harold laughed. No one will believe a mentally unstable woman. I've already had doctors sign papers saying you're not well. Suddenly, they heard a commotion from the hallway. Jack Chen burst into the room, followed by several people with cameras. Perfect timing, Jack said loudly. We're just about to show what's in these books. Harold's face turned red. Get those cameras out of my house. But more people were coming into the room. Richard recognized reporters from major news channels. Behind them was Mrs. Moore, smiling at her son. What is this? Harold demanded. Mrs. Moore stepped forward. I invited some friends from the press. They're very interested in Elizabeth's story. One reporter pushed a microphone toward Elizabeth. Ms. Westbrook, is it true you've been living as a homeless woman after discovering your family's financial crimes? Another asked, can you tell us what's in those books you're holding? Harold tried to grab the books from Elizabeth, but Richard blocked him. In the struggle, papers fell to the floor. A reporter picked one up. This shows millions of dollars being moved to offshore accounts, the reporter said, taking pictures of the paper. Harold lunged for the reporter, but security guards held him back. Not his guards. These were police officers who had come with the press. Harold Westbrook, one officer said, "We have questions about some financial irregularities at your bank." Jack smiled at Harold. "The SEC has been investigating you for months. They just needed evidence." Elizabeth opened one of the books. "It's all here. Every account they stole from, every fake investment, every lie." Her voice was steady and strong. "My father and uncle took money from ordinary people and hid it in secret accounts. Over $500 million. The room exploded with questions from reporters. Cameras flashed as police officers took Harold away. Elizabeth answered questions calmly, explaining how she had discovered the truth after her father's death and why she had chosen to disappear. "I was ashamed of what my family had done," she told the reporters. "I couldn't face the people who lost everything because of us. So I gave away what I had and tried to understand what life was like for those my father had hurt." Richard stood beside her, holding her hand. A reporter asked, "Mr. Moore, how did you meet Ms. Westbrook?" "I found her sheltering from the rain," Richard said simply. "I had no idea who she really was. I just knew she was special." Later that night, after the reporters left, Elizabeth sat with Richard in the garden of the Westbrook mansion. For the first time in years, she looked peaceful. "What happens now?" Richard asked. "The lawyers say most of the stolen money can be found and returned," Elizabeth said. "People will get back what they lost." "And us?" Richard asked quietly. Elizabeth looked up at the stars. "I never thought I could be happy in this house again. But tonight, with you here, it feels different." Richard took her hand. "I have something to ask you, Elizabeth Westbrook." Before he could continue, Elizabeth's phone rang. It was Jack, his voice urgent. "Elizabeth, you need to be careful," he said. "Harold made a call before the police took him away. I don't know who he called, but he said something about taking care of the problem permanently." Richard and Elizabeth didn't wait to find out what Harold's mysterious call meant. They left the mansion immediately and went to a safe house Jack had arranged. "We'll stay here until the police can confirm there's no danger," Jack explained as he showed them the small but comfortable apartment. For the next 3 days, they watched the news from their hiding place. Harold had been arrested and charged with fraud. Many former Westbrook Bank workers came forward with more evidence. The story was everywhere. "You're a hero to these people," Richard told Elizabeth, showing her online comments from people who had lost money to the bank. Elizabeth shook her head. "I'm not a hero. I just did what was right, and I should have done it sooner." On the 4th day, Jack arrived with good news. The police found the man Harold called. He was a hired thug, but they caught him before he could do anything. "You're safe now." Elizabeth breathed a sigh of relief. "So it's really over." "The legal part is just beginning," Jack said. "But the danger is over. Harold will go to prison for a long time." Now that they were safe, Richard took Elizabeth to his favorite spot in the city, a small garden on top of a hill that overlooked the lights below. "This is where I come to think," Richard explained. "I wanted to bring you here because, well, I have a question I didn't get to ask you at the mansion." Elizabeth smiled at him. Her eyes were clear and bright, no longer carrying the sadness they once had. Richard took a small box from his pocket and got down on one knee. "I know we've only known each other for a short time, but in that time, I've seen your bravery, your kindness, and your strength. I don't care if you're Elizabeth Westbrook or Sarah the assistant. I love who you are inside. Will you marry me?" Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she whispered. "But are you sure? My name will always be linked to scandal now." "I've never been more sure of anything," Richard said, slipping the ring on her finger. 6 months later, Richard and Elizabeth were married in a simple ceremony with only close friends present. Instead of wedding gifts, they asked people to donate to a fund they had created to help those who had lost money to Westbrook Bank. With the evidence Elizabeth found, lawyers were able to recover most of the stolen money. Elizabeth used what remained of her inheritance to add to the fund. She and Richard also started a program to help homeless people find jobs and housing. Not everyone on the streets is a secret billionaire, Elizabeth joked during an interview, but everyone deserves a second chance. 1 year after their wedding, Richard and Elizabeth visited the spot where they first met, the store awning where he had found her sheltering from the rain. They placed a small plaque there that read, "Sometimes the most valuable things in life are found in unexpected places." The story of the millionaire who married a homeless woman, only to discover she was really a billionaire in hiding, became famous around the world. Movies and books were made about them, though Elizabeth always said the real story was about the people her family had hurt and how they rebuilt their lives. "What do you think your father would say if he could see you now?" a reporter once asked her. Elizabeth thought for a moment. "I hope he would be proud that I found the courage to fix his mistakes. But more than that, I hope he would see that true wealth isn't about money. It's about how many lives you touch in a positive way." Richard squeezed her hand as they walked away from the cameras. "From homeless to hero," he said with a smile. "Quite a journey." "Our journey," Elizabeth corrected him. "And it's only just beginning."